This presentation is about Innerstate, which is a tool which we developed at the University of Bolton for encouraging people to reflect on the way that they manage the complexities of their learning and how they balance those complexities with everyday life. This is the tool that we've developed, which represents the complexities that need to be managed by a series of conveyor belts carrying what we call burdens, and the objective is basically to collect those burdens, and by collecting those burdens effectively we say that those burdens are being managed. In thinking about this model, we've been influenced by the viable system model, and particularly thinking about how the viable system model maps on to the person, the idea of the person. The viable system model comprises 4 regulatory mechanisms, and those mechanisms are responsible for managing the complexity in a particular system. And basically the different levels of the viable system model do different jobs in terms of regulating that complexity. So what I'm going to do is just explain the different bits of functionality of Innerstate and show how they tie on to the different regulatory aspects of the viable system model. First of all, let's start with System 1. Now, System 1 is the stuff that needs to be managed, and basically that's the stuff that comes off the conveyor belts. Our principal mechanism for managing the complexities of life are the instincts and habits that we have for dealing with things. And these include things like the prioritizations that we have in terms of what's important to us personally. And these can be represented in Innerstate by defining a set of priorities for the thing that's collecting the stuff that's coming off the conveyor belts. So this is really our first defence. In the viable system model, effectively these things are represented by System 2. System 2 is the sort of first anti-oscillatory mechanism to stop things getting completely out of control. So here we are in Innerstate, and I'm setting up priorities by clicking on the various things that are coming down the conveyor belts, the System 1 complexities, and setting priority levels in terms of what's important for me as a person to manage. So some of them I'm turning right down, like love life, and other things I'm turning up, like time management and finances. Of course, attenuating things like this may or may not be a good thing. Usually in life it's not a good idea to ignore something for too long. And this is where, there are 2 things in Innerstate which we have to take account of. First of all, those things which we ignore can be transformed into things which demand our attention later on. But more importantly, we need a level of organisation here which looks at the actual situation that needs to be managed at the moment and organises resources to deal with that situation. And this is where Innerstate allows us to expand our capacity or increase our capacity to organise things. So here, looking at the situation with this poor person who's trying to manage complexity, frankly I need more help. And so I'm going to enlist some supporters. There's one, and there's another one, the green and blue ones. And those supporters have their own priorities, and I need to negotiate with those supporters how they're going to manage that complexity. And so by doing this is a different level of organisation for managing complexity. And this is something which is associated with System 3 of the viable system model, of ways of organising ourselves, of ways of making sure that the things that we do are best suited to managing the complexity of the situation as we see it. So it's fine to have a system-free, optimal organisation to deal with a particular situation, providing the world doesn't change. If it does change, then we've got a new problem, we've got a new set of problems. And in the viable system model, the job of System 4 is to look to see how we would cope in a changed environment, and to also to look at the potential for that environment to change in ways that might threaten us. In Innerstate, we've basically created a set of environments which are very, very different from one another, and the objective that we tell the learners is to find ways of organising themselves which remain viable in a variety of different environments, or to find ways in which they can adapt from one environment to another environment. So here we have in Innerstate one situation and a particular way of organising ourselves, which actually in fact isn't that effective, but it's, you know, it's okay. But then suddenly we can change it, and so we have a completely different situation. And do those same patterns of organisation work well in this situation? And this is, again, trying to draw attention to this issue of environmental change, the continual potential for environmental change, and the need to organise ourselves in such a way that we're ready for change and that we can survive, we know that we can survive in different sorts of environments. And this whole issue of looking ahead to the future, looking to possible changes, is associated with System 4. So finally, we might ask, well, what's left? We have ways of organising ourselves, we have ways of establishing habits, we have ways of dealing with changes to the environment, of organising ourselves so that we become future-proof effectively. What's left? What are we? Why are we doing this? These are the questions which System 5 is really geared to managing. And Innerstate provides various sort of monitoring facilities to try and give an indication of the sort of overall health, the state of the person. So here's the overall interface of Innerstate, and these gauges and sliders give an indication of the overall sort of state of the person. And there are differing sort of situations that you might have. The best situation is, of course, the optimal organisation, which seems to be stable in a variety of different circumstances and where the priorities match, are consistent across all circumstances. But many other states aren't going to be so stable. Okay, so we can use Innerstate to get learners to talk about the way they manage themselves, the way they organise themselves. But I suppose it's reasonable to ask, well, what's the point? Why are we doing this? What is its sort of educational potential? Now, in the way that we've used the viable system model, one of the principal benefits of the viable system model is that it is, first of all, it's a recursive model, and it's basically a template that one can view any situation, any dynamic situation, and see it as a viable system. And this in itself can be a very useful thing. It's almost as if you've got a pattern template which you can then apply to many areas of your life, or many areas of the things that you do. And I suppose this is what we're trying to drive at through using Innerstate, is to get people to see different aspects of what makes things viable, and to show how this pattern of looking at things can be useful to them. So, for example, to see recursive patterns of regulation, self-regulation, within the context of managing a healthy bloodstream, particularly if you're a diabetic sufferer, to see those patterns of regulation and to relate those patterns of regulation to the patterns of regulation in everyday life might be useful. So for example, people can establish patterns and then look at how those patterns relate to a different model. So to summarise, we've created something that's very practical and very tangible in a piece of software and a computer game that's quite attractive and grabs people's attention. On the other hand, this is articulating something that's quite deep and encourages learners, or we're trying to encourage learners, to get them to think about their organisational approach to their entire lives. So whilst it looks trivial, it's really we're obviously very ambitious in what we're doing. Of course, Innerstate is then an educational intervention like any other educational intervention, and our main focus now is on evaluating it. We have a variety of different situations where we're going to be trying Innerstate. First of all, its use in lifelong learning, and particularly the lifelong learners on the SPLICE project, is something which is giving us an indication of how learners are particularly looking at their use of technology as a way of increasing their organisational capacity. And this is something which has actually been running through as a theme in the SPLICE project anyway, so it ties in quite well with that. What we also have is the group of adolescent diabetics who are going to be using Innerstate to try and get an insight into the complexities of the management of their condition, and also try to situate those complexities of the management of their condition within the context of their broader lives. And this is an approach which is being used as a different way, first of all, of data gathering, of getting information about people, or information from people, but also as a way of actually trying to give them an insight into the complexities of what it is that they're trying to manage. And this presents some challenges and some interesting potentials for us. The bottom line with this really is that any educational intervention, and particularly one of this sort, gives people something to talk about. It gives learners something to talk about, it gives teachers something to talk about. It makes a change to the discourse, effectively. And it's the extent to which the discussions that happen as a result of using Innerstate might not have happened if we hadn't used it. That's something which we're very interested in, and particularly those discussions that happen between learners and teachers, those discussions that happen between adolescent diabetics and their doctors and people who are trying to care for them. And this way of actually using some sort of technology just as a way of getting people to talk about things which they wouldn't otherwise have talked about is fundamentally the focus of how we're going to evaluate the success of it.